Good afternoon. I'm Spot On Weather meteorologist Matthew Euler, and today's video presentation is titled Cold is King. And I wanted to share this picture with you. This was an image that I happened to take yesterday, a picture I took yesterday afternoon on the 20th of January 2019 over Southeast Virginia. And this was when the Arctic air was really starting to filter into the area, into the mid-Atlantic region. In this image, you see a setting sun. Can't really see the sun in the picture, but the light rays from the sun are reflecting on the undersides of some middle-level clouds, some altocumulus clouds. So a really cool picture. Thought I would share it with everybody. I have a real love for some amazing skyscapes. When you talk about light and cloud effects, I mean, there's some amazing photos out there. And this is just another great example of nature and looking at all the wonderful beauty around us when it comes to nature in general. All right, so let's get right to the video presentation. We're going to start it off with current conditions across Southeast Virginia as of 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the 21st of January 2019. Very, very cold day across the Mid-Atlantic region in Southeast Virginia. Current temperatures in the Hampton Roads areas ranging anywhere from 24 degrees down at Oceana, 25 degrees at the Norfolk Airport, and then temperatures all the way down, just kind of hanging out around 23 degrees out to the northwest over Richmond. So there is a lot of cold air. Look at the image, the satellite image on the right-hand side here. This is a great distinct signature of very cold air pouring off the East Coast. If you notice the cloud texture there in the bottom right portion of the image, it's completely clear over the land. But if you notice when the northwesterly winds, those strong northwesterly winds, that cold air pours out over the relatively warmer waters of the western Atlantic, you'll see a distinct boundary there of a clear versus cloudy situation as the northwest winds blow offshore and pick up the moisture from the ocean beneath them, and that creates the clouds. So that's a distinct picture of a cold air weather pattern across the eastern U.S. and across the eastern seaboard as a whole. But it's a very cold afternoon. Wind chill values across Southeast Virginia, single digits into the teens, and that's about it. And I was just outside, and it was just another strong wind gust that we just felt here across the Hampton Roads area. Very windy, very strong northwest winds. Arctic air is in place today for sure. Here is the weather analysis for today, the 21st of January 2019. Now, when I show these forecast charts, these images in this presentation, I'm going to give definite credit to the tropicaltidbits.com website. That is where I'm pulling these images from. The image on the left shows you a thickness chart, and then the image on the right shows you a 500 millibar height anomaly chart. The image on the left showing lower thickness values generally over the East Coast. That's synonymous or very similar to very cold temperatures. When I have very low thickness values, I have very low temperatures. The image on the right with the upper level height anomalies at 18,000 feet. The blue shading indicates below normal temperatures. The pinkish shading indicates above normal temperatures. So right now we have a long wave trough situated over the eastern seaboard. Behind it we have a upper level ridge, upper level height center, higher heights just to the west over the Midwest today. And then there's another upper level trough to the western U.S. So what we expect with time is that pink magenta area there to the west of Mid-Atlantic, that will eventually push east, and that ridge will build in on the 23rd, Wednesday the 23rd of January, and Thursday the 24th. That warmth, the upper level ridge, will push east. This trough will push off the coast, so it will have some modifying temperatures that will be warmer here coming up this week before the next surge of Arctic air. Here is an updated forecast on the Arctic Oscillation, the AO, and the North Atlantic Oscillation, the NAO. My red circular areas, I got the image of the AO on the left, the image of the NAO on the right. The red circular areas indicate very strong, sharp crash to the Arctic Oscillation, and that favors a colder than normal weather pattern across the eastern United States. Image on the right, and I'm really interested in how this all pans out. The image on the right, that red circled area there, the bottom right, that shows a negative North Atlantic oscillation. All right, so that might come into play here shortly, the negative NAO, as far as setting up a Greenland block or high latitude blocking, which may result in a storm system getting trapped, or the track of the storm may be closer to the coast, moving straight north up the coast. That is a distinct possibility here in the long range. I will get into that here in a few minutes with the presentation, but just showing you the trends. Negative Arctic oscillation, and it's tanking pretty solidly to the negative side, down to -3, even almost as low as -4, around the 1st of February, or the first few days after the 1st of February. The image on the right shows a negative North Atlantic oscillation around the same time period. Very important to pay attention to these oscillation to teleconnection oscillation patterns. The polar vortex update, the image on the left showing you the 12Z 21 January 2019 image on the right showing you the NCEP GEFS Global Ensemble Forecasting System. In any case, the polar vortex is keeping the eastern U.S. in a cold pattern overall through the rest of January. You see the blue shadings as well as the purple shadings. Now the purple shadings, the GFS is a little more robust, it's a little more strong as far as the strength and the depth of the cold air that's going to pivot down around the backside of the polar vortex. The GEF's not as bullish as the GFS on the left. So we're just keeping an eye on it. But needless to say, the polar vortex is still going to be a major player in the weather for the upcoming 10 days. Now, as I mentioned just briefly, here's some 500 millibar or 18,000 foot charts. The height anomalies again, which I like to show. The orangish, reddish, kind of like the maroonish colors, they generally migrate to the east coast. So the cold Arctic air we have today here on the 21st of January will quickly push off the coast and will be replaced by height rises in the upper levels of the atmosphere. When the upper level heights rise, that generally leads to a warming temperature pattern. So the image on the left showing you the forecast for Wednesday, January 23rd, as well as the image on the right, just showing you a little bit later in the day on the 23rd. The bluish color in the Midwest there on the image on the right on the morning of January 23rd, that's our next dip in the jet stream, our next colder set of temperatures, another Arctic plunge, which will be coming into the area a little bit later in the week. So milder again. So if you're not a fan of this very frigid air, you're in luck, because Wednesday and Thursday, temperatures across Southeast Virginia and the Mid-Atlantic could get into the lower 60s, believe it or not, which is just crazy, the way the temperatures have been bouncing around from very mild to Arctic in nature. So we'll just keep an eye on this. Moving on to the 24th of January. So with the mild temperatures will come another storm system, and it's another storm system in which a track is moving, generally staying inland over land. We have a surge of warmth, so we're going to get all rain. We have an area of low pressure on the morning of Thursday, the 24th of January. It's situated over northern New Jersey. We have a cold front being drugged down. The next shot of cold air with a cold front being drugged through the area by late in the day on Thursday, the 24th of January. We have another strong cold surge that will be following behind this departing low pressure system. But notice how far up the rain gets again for late January. There's rain all the way up into New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire. These are areas that were just recently hit by a pretty good snowfall this past weekend, and now it's going to be replaced by a mild surge of air out ahead of the next cold surge of Arctic air. So this is quite incredible. The eastern U.S. So far this winter just hasn't had much in the way of snow. We haven't had many coastal storm tracks, and that's a big reason why. And plus we were having a lot of times where we just weren't getting the cold air, especially from the 10th of December to about the 10th of January. Now, the colder weather is set to return. You can see the blue shading in the image on the left showing you lower upper level heights, below normal upper level heights at about 18,000 feet. We got a nice upper level ridge over the western U.S. We got a deep trough over the eastern U.S. We do have the thickness lines on the right down to 522 decameter thickness here over the Hampton Roads area. Much lower thickness values up over New England at that time. The polar vortex situated over eastern Canada, right? But it's fairly dry and it's cold after this frontal system and the area of low pressure move away from the east coast. It dries out again. It gets colder again. We do have a little bit of snow up over Iowa and Minnesota at this time on Saturday morning, the 26th of January. That's just with a little clipper system. No significant storm system at that point. Most of the United States is fairly dry on Saturday. Moving ahead now, the next wave of Arctic air comes in the 29th and the 30th of January 2019. So we have colder air returning, definitely. You'll start feeling much colder by Saturday, this upcoming Saturday, the 26th of January. And then we have another wave of Arctic air, another reinforcing shot on the backside of the polar vortex that will be moving into the area all the way down to the Gulf Coast this time. 29 and 30 January, that's a fairly carved out deep long wave trough over the eastern U.S. All right, so we're going to have possibly, that's another Arctic front there with area of low pressure over Massachusetts with moisture out ahead of it all the way down the east coast. And then on the image on the right just shows how that system departs. The cold Arctic air is in place again. By Wednesday, January 30th, it's in full effect. So a couple surges of Arctic air are still to come. Here again is what I mentioned in my last video and how favorable this upper air pattern is for a big East Coast winter storm. I'm still not shying away from that. The image on the left, as I explained in the last video, showed you what the upper air pattern was across the eastern U.S. last January, January 4th. This image is from January 4th, 2018. We had a deep upper level trough situated over the eastern U.S. The image on the right, this is the forecast. In most of the models are still in fairly good agreement with this pattern, but you see that blue shading showing you that deep upper level trough, below normal temperatures, below normal heights, and that really typically leads to some type of formation of a storm system, generally in the Gulf of Mexico, and then it generally likes to ride up the East Coast. So we're still looking at a favorable pattern for an East Coast winter storm. I'm not backing away from that because the past image here, the past has proven that this type of pattern promotes and is favorable for such development of a storm. Now, moving on now to the next winter storm potential, we're looking here at 27 to 29 January 2019. Now, the models are all different. And I'm just going to show you a few different models and where they're projecting a low pressure system to be located for the time period between the 27th and 29th of January. All right, the first one we're looking at, the first model is the FV3 GFS forecast. And this is for Sunday, the 27th of January on the left, and then Monday, the 28th of January on the right. See where the low pressure system is situated? Situated well off the southeast coast, not too close to the coast actually, it's pretty far out to sea. Image on the right shows that low pressure system continuing to intensify, to deepen, continues to move northeast pretty much away from the east coast. So according to the FV3 GFS forecast, it looks to be that the storm will miss the east coast entirely. There's much colder air that is situated to the northwest of the storm on this particular model. So I thought I would just show you this particular model and its latest input as of 12Z, the 21st of January. What about the Canadian forecast? For the same time period, the image on the left shows an area of low pressure situated just to the east of Jacksonville, Florida. All right. The air mass still is fairly cold to the northwest from the mid-Atlantic northwestward. There's a 1046 millibar high situated over North Dakota. So that's starting to drop the next surge of Arctic air into the Midwest at this time. Image on the right shows the progression of that area of low pressure or storm system situated just off of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. So look, you can already see there's a major difference here, right? FV3 GFS showing the low pressure system or the center of the storm much further out to sea to the east. Very little impact to the eastern U.S., okay, to the mid-Atlantic. The Canadian forecast shows the low pressure system much closer and it tends to want to move this low pressure system further north up the coast. So more of a northeast track and then a northerly track right up the coast. But you'll notice on the image on the right, the coldest Arctic air remains separate from this particular storm system, which means there's a lot of rain instead of snow for the mid-Atlantic, up into New Jersey again, up into eastern Pennsylvania, fairly mild again with this type of setup. With that low being that close to the coast, it's just not favorable. You get a lot of onshore winds, southeasterly winds, easterly wind component. That's going to modify the air mass, okay? And the coldest air is still remaining detached to the northwest of the low pressure center. Let's continue on with the Canadian forecast. This is what I'm talking about. Watch this whole progression. Image on the left, low pressure forming just the east of Jacksonville, Florida by Sunday morning, the 27th of January. By the evening of Sunday, the 27th of January, that low pressure system is approaching Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, drags enough marine layer air in off the ocean to basically make it a main rain event for the mid-Atlantic. Now look ahead here. This image on the left on this slide is showing you the morning of 28 January, Monday, on the Canadian. Now the low pressure system has intensified to a 987 millibar low, fairly significant in strength. The rain snow line is pushed all the way back towards the mountains, towards the Appalachian Mountains. So western PA down to West Virginia will get snow in this scenario. As that intensification occurs with a low pressure system with the storm, the colder northerly winds start dragging in some of the Arctic air from the northwest. And an image on the right shows you that the low is now intensified to 980 millibars, pretty much just to the west of New York City at this point in time. But a much colder surge of air behind the storm, as denoted by these dashed blue thickness lines. The European. What's the latest European? This is hot off the press, the latest European model, showing a much stronger monster storm, monster low, 984 millibars on Sunday. This would be Monday afternoon. There's a 984 millibar low situated off of the Carolinas. Most of the Arctic air remains well to the northwest of the storm, detached from the storm, so it's fairly mild across the mid-Atlantic and the eastern U.S. The image on the right shows that area of low pressure staying offshore, though, not in line with what the Canadian was showing. The Canadian model was showing more of a northward track closer to the coast. Now that would be, more of a northward track would be associated with a negative North Atlantic oscillation, a stronger Greenland upper level high pressure system. We call that, with the negative NAO, that tends to keep storms closer to the east coast. So perhaps the Canadian model is seeing a stronger NAO, North Atlantic oscillation, than the other models at the present time. But in any case, the European is a monster low, okay? Monster low, it's generally staying offshore though. The main impacts remaining offshore, maybe a little bit of wind and rain, cold rain into the Carolinas at this point in time. But the coldest Arctic air remains back from just west of the Appalachian Mountains to the Midwest. Okay? To get a major winter storm, we got to get that Arctic air closer to the coast, closer to the eastern seaboard. And in the latest European model, just not showing that. Now, what I want to really indicate here is the pattern is favorable for a big East Coast storm. Okay? The overall dynamics, the overall pattern is favoring it. And right now, I just want you to know there's a potential for a storm. All these models are going to change. They're going to change between now and the weekend. All right? So I'm not trying to sound any alarms here, but there's a potential for an impactful winter storm event across the eastern U.S. if the timing of the cold Arctic air matches up with the track, with a closer track to the coast for a low pressure system. So take a look at this. You can see Canadian and the European. All the models are showing something, and that's really what I want you to focus in on right now. Whether it's the GFS, or whether it's the Canadian, or whether it's the European, they all have low pressure moving up, storm system moving up the eastern seaboard at some point between the 27th and 29th of January. So it's just something to really keep a close eye on. There's a lot of factors that are going to come into play. Maybe it's just going to be a cold rain event along the mid-Atlantic. Maybe it will The colder air will get dragged down closer to the coast, and that could result in more of a winter storm, significant winter storm somewhere in the mid-Atlantic. Just keep this in mind. All models indicating it, and I just wanted to show the latest on this. This pattern is very favorable for some sort of winter storm development. Okay, then I haven't really looked out very far at the other models, but this was an interesting model just to kind of throw it out there. The Canadian model is showing a much colder Arctic air mass plunging all the way down to the northern Gulf of Mexico by the 30th of January, and an area of low pressure developing over southern Georgia. And there is ice basically from central Alabama, central Georgia, into South Carolina and North Carolina. And then there's heavier snow, snow falling in the deep south, Alabama, northern Georgia, western North Carolina, on up into the mid-Atlantic. So this is the potential. There's another potential out there beyond the 27 to 29 January storm. There's another potential for something possibly to develop if this upper level trough was to be this deep and the Arctic air was to be this firmly in place. There could definitely be something setting up, another system beyond the 27th to 29th of January. So just something to keep an eye on for sure. Another thing I like to keep a real close eye on here in Southeast Virginia for the local Southeast Virginia forecast are water temperatures. And with this latest shot of cold Arctic air and these strong north-northwesterly winds, the water temperatures are projected to drop from they basically were 45 degrees yesterday on the 20th of January. They're projected to drop to between 41 and 42 degrees Fahrenheit by Wednesday morning, the 23rd of January. So colder air is being funneled down from the Chesapeake Bay down off the coast of Southeast Virginia. And the colder the water temperature gets, remember, the higher the likelihood of wintry weather across Southeast Virginia. If we get one of these kind of monster type storms to make the right track with cold air in place, cold air aloft in place, and even with the wind off the water, the lower this water temperature gets, the less impact it's going to have on keeping the precipitation liquid form. Right. And by the way, this photo, this is a Chesapeake Bay Operating Forecasting System model, and this is courtesy of NOAA. Right. Speaking of NOAA, here's the official NOAA temperature outlook. All right. The image on the left shows below normal temperatures, 80% likelihood, pretty much from the upper Midwest, Wisconsin, Illinois, all the way down to Florida, between 26th and the 30th of January. The image on the right shows the 8 to 14 temperature outlook, and there's an 80% probability, there's a 70% probability, 70 to 80% for below normal temperatures across the eastern U.S., with the coldest air being projected over Minnesota, Wisconsin, lower Michigan, into the Midwest, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. All right, so it's showing you the pattern here, and that's really what I'm trying to do in this particular images, is show you where the lowest temperatures are across the U.S. and where the warmest temperatures are over California all the way up into Alaska with a stronger upper level ridge. Here is the European temperature forecast for Southeast Virginia. In particular, this is for the Norfolk, Virginia area. So you'll notice today, high about 26 degrees. It's not moving much today. There's a lot of sun out there, but that strong cold air is just being transported in on those strong northwesterly winds down to the upper teens, maybe even colder in some inland locations tonight. High temperature recovers tomorrow to the 30s, into the 30s again, and then look at the surge in the temperatures all the way, Wednesday up to 54. Then I believe we'll actually probably get into the lower 60s. This model's a little too cool for Thursday with a strong southerly wind and rain on Thursday. Arctic front comes through Thursday night into Friday morning, and look at your temperatures dropping off. Your high now 41 on Friday the 25th, 36 degrees, that's it for Saturday the 26th, and then look how consistent the temperatures are. Mid-30s to mid-40s from the 27th of January next Sunday through February 4th. And this is the European latest forecast temperature plot. All right, so here are my final thoughts for today's video. We are still looking at waves of Arctic cold that will continue to persist across the eastern United States pretty much through the end of January. Now, I know we're going to have a little bit of a mild spike in temperatures the next Wednesday and Thursday this week coming up, but outside of that little brief mild period, we have wave after wave of Arctic cold still spilling in on the backside of that polar vortex. High temperatures expected to be 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit below normal for late January standards. Some locations across the Northeast and upper Midwest may even see greater departures than that. The models are supporting that pattern of an upper level trough in the eastern U.S. and upper level ridge out in the western U.S. And that is that makes a lot of sense, being that we're in a negative Arctic oscillation situation. So we have negative AO, and we get that negative NAO could play a major role in the track of a possible coastal storm early next week. Milder surge of air is moving up the East Coast this Wednesday and Thursday, 23 and 24 January, with high temperatures surging into the 50s and even the 60s ahead of that next Arctic cold front. So it's going to be rainy. Rain's going to move back into the area overnight on Wednesday night and definitely Thursday. Thursday is going to be the rainy day of the week with those milder temperatures. Next surge of Arctic air is slated for 25 January. That would be Friday, with additional Arctic cold surges to follow through the end of the month. All right, so we're going to continue to see those repetitive shots of Arctic air. Now, the potential remains for winter storms to develop over the Gulf of Mexico and move up the eastern seaboard. Why? We have a favorable pattern with a deep upper level trough over the east. We have a negative Arctic oscillation and a negative North Atlantic oscillation. That negative NAO, that could play an even more significant role, being that it sets up high latitude, high pressure over Greenland, which generally keeps storms closer to the coast as they move up the coast. With a negative NAO, storms are unable to move readily out to sea and away from the East Coast. That might be why the Canadian and even the European is closer right now to the East Coast than the GFS is. Just something to keep an eye on. My big question for that storm next week, early next week, would be, will the Arctic air meet up with the moisture? Or will that Arctic air remain detached and too far away to the northwest? When we look at this European model, your lowest thicknesses, your coldest air remains over the Midwest, well removed, not even hooking up with this storm at all. With the Canadian forecast, there is more of a connection between that cold Arctic air and the storm system. So this is a case, the Canadian is the coldest model right now, which would indicate a greater threat of a winter storm in the mid-Atlantic and up the coast than, let's say, the European is at the present time. Despite a milder MJO phase 4 and 5, now I didn't throw up the latest MJO forecast from the Climate Prediction Center, but it's basically looking like MJO is currently in phase 4 and it's moving towards phase 5. Now, normally when you get those phases of the Madden-Julian oscillation, the MJO, that typically favors a ridge off the southeastern U.S., and that also results in much milder temperatures across the eastern U.S. Looking at the strength of the MJO, looking at the stratospheric warming effect and the polar vortex, we think that the polar vortex is going to win out, and it's going to be the predominant northern hemisphere circulation player. It's going to be the main player, the polar vortex, sending lobes of Arctic air southward for the remainder of January, with possible longer-lasting effects well into February. Some of the longer-range models are indicating continuous surges of Arctic air into the first week of February. There are a couple models out there, though, that are kind of backing off the cold into early February and perhaps replacing it with some milder air in the east. So it's just something to keep an eye on. At the present time, even though the MJO is in phases 4 right now, going towards 5 in the forecast, which usually favors milder temperatures in the eastern U.S., we believe that the polar vortex will be the predominant player affecting the northern hemisphere circulation through the end of January for sure. Okay, so just wanted to throw that out there. We are still keeping an eye on the Madden-Julian oscillation, the MJO. I know there's been, especially in Twitter, there's been a lot of tweets out there about, well, the MJO is going to phase 4 and 5, and it's not going to be that cold. Well, sometimes the atmosphere, other teleconnections, the negative Arctic oscillation, the polar vortex, sometimes those other teleconnections are actually stronger than other ones, and we believe that will be the case for the remainder of January. Outside of this quick little mild warm-up coming up Wednesday and Thursday, the 23rd and 24th of January, we're looking like we're going to be colder. We agree with this European temperature forecast, and you know, your high temperatures across southeast Virginia, for example, only between 35 and 45, pretty much from the 26th of January, upcoming Saturday, all the way through 4 February. Now, again, things could change. We'll keep an eye on this. We'll keep an eye on the track of this developing storm system next week. Early next week, Monday, Tuesday, 28, 29 January. Those would be the days we'd be impacted. But again, you know, this is going to change. This is going to change. The tracks of these lows, the models are going to constantly change. They're going to constantly go back and forth. Usually they don't lock on to a permanent solution on tracks, on intensity, where's the cold air, all the dynamics, until, you know, about 48 hours out from the storm, from the event. So again, nothing to get super alarmed about, but I'm just showing you that we're now in the phase where we're getting some sort of low pressure development. Now, it's favorable based on the long wave pattern on the right-hand image with a deep trough in the east, a huge upper level ridge in the west. So we got cold air pumping in, and then we got an area of low pressure developing at the same time. That's very favorable. Very favorable conditions, a very favorable weather pattern for something to develop. And this could be a significant storm according to the European model. So just something that we got to keep an eye on. All models are in agreement. Hey, something's going to develop. But where does it develop? And does it merge? Do we get that cold Arctic air? Do we get that cold Arctic air to come down and get close enough to the coast to actually result in wintry precip, not rain? So it's something to keep an eye on. That wraps things up here at Spot On Weather. As always, I really greatly appreciate your viewership, and I really enjoy sharing the knowledge of weather with everyone out there. I'm hoping it's informative for you all. I break it down as best I can so you understand it. That wraps things up. Spot On Weather. Stay warm out there today. It's a very cold day. The Arctic winds are blowing. We're Spot On Weather. If we're not spot on, we're not doing it right. I wish everybody a pleasant Monday the 21st of January. Enjoy and have a great day, everyone.